Abigail's Hodag Dream. August 2020, Madison, Wisconsin. Everything turns out just fine in this story, and no persons or animals are hurt. But for young children, parts of the story may be scary. Please adapt as needed. Abigail's Hodag Dream. Grr, growl, roar! A cold shiver swept over Abigail, and she hugged her grandma tightly. The Hodag sure did sound scary. Abigail was frightened. Abigail had been helping her Mama and Daddy and Aunt Toby and Grandma and Baba pack camping supplies all week. Tomorrow, they would pitch their purple tent in northern Wisconsin. It sounded like so much fun. Except for the Hodag. Grandma told Abigail some people thought the Hodag was a huge, scary beast that roams the northern forest. She described his scaly green skin, his glowing red eyes, his sharp claws and teeth, and the pointy spikes on his back and tail.
Roar, howl, growl, the Hodag stalks about. He's left his deep dark cave, and you'd better not come out. He's horrid and he's vile, and he's ugly and he's mean. The worstest, baddest monster that you have ever seen. He tears up trees and bushes with his ugly, scaly snout. And what else he might do, well, I hope we don't find out. If you hear him in the woods, I hope you'll run away and hide somewhere that's safe, so you live another day.
Aunt Toby told Abigail the Hodag was a mythical creature. Abigail knew exactly what that meant. When she was very young, her parents told her about the beautiful island of Calafia, and said it was mythical too. But how could she forget flying her bed through the night sky to Calafia, or soaring above the island on the back of a griffin? And sometimes, as she drifted off to sleep, she thought about Queen Calafia, and softly sang the Calafia song to herself.
An island paradise. It's home to fuzzy, friendly cats and lovely butterflies. I know someday I'll be there, and I hope it's very soon. I will go by boat, or maybe I'll swim or drift there by balloon.
Abigail was confused. She was pretty sure Calafia was real. She still had the beautiful golden necklace with a griffin pendant that Queen Calafia herself had given her. Even though Aunt Toby and Grandma and Baba thought the Hodag was mythical, Abigail wasn't so sure. Grandma told Abigail she didn't need to be afraid, because even if the Hodag was real, he was probably a sweet and kind monster. Like Dee Dee, Auntie Sarah's golden retriever. Abigail felt better. She loved Dee Dee. Even though Dee Dee had big sharp teeth, she wasn't scary. She just wanted to play and give wet sloppy kisses. The next morning, Mama and Daddy and Abigail and Aunt Toby and Grandma and Baba all packed their sleeping bags and traveled to Oneida County in northern Wisconsin. They pitched their big purple tent under the pines on a quiet campsite by a sparkling stream. Abigail ducked into the tent and unzipped her camping pack. She took out the colored pencils and sketching paper Vozinia and Grandpa Bob had given her for her birthday. She'd been practicing her drawing every day and was excited to draw the campsite. She sat at the picnic table, singing quietly to herself as she worked intently on her masterpiece. When she was almost done, she asked Mama and Daddy to pose. and added them to her drawing. She even included her little baby brother, growing in Mama's tummy. She showed the finished picture to Daddy and asked if he'd help her mail it to Auntie Andrea when they got back home. Abigail carefully slipped her picture inside the notebook of sketching paper so it wouldn't be damaged. Then Mama asked her to find some dried twigs for the campfire. Mama told Abigail that when she was a girl, they called her the fire goddess because she was so good at starting campfires. She showed Abigail how to build a pile of sticks, putting small twigs on the bottom and laying bigger sticks in a crisscross pattern on top. Then Mama lit the pile, and Abigail blew on the flame to help it grow. Soon the campfire was blazing away, and they stepped back to admire it. While Aunt Toby cooked taco chili over the fire, Abigail sat by the stream for what felt like hours, entranced by the swirling, flowing, crystal-clear water. She could see schools of little fish swimming against the current, and colorful glistening pebbles on the bottom of the stream.
Babbling, burbling, lovely and free, just starting your journey way down to the sea. You tickle my toes with your rippling flow, so clean and so cold from the fresh melted snow. Rushing clear stream, so sparkling and bright, you frolic and splash past our forest campsite. I wonder what stories you'd tell us if you could murmur a tale of lands you've been through. Beautiful stream, oh beautiful stream, flowing so free as you rush to the sea.
After dinner, Baba put some big logs on the campfire so it would burn all night and keep the Hodag away. Abigail took off her blue tennis shoes and left them by the mat outside the tent. She zipped the tent flaps closed and snuggled into her sleeping bag between Mama and Daddy. She reached out and felt Mama's tummy and giggled when the baby kicked. Mama said her brother would be born in just a few more months. Abigail would be a big sister. She was so excited. Grandma and Baba sang a camping lullaby for Abigail, and she settled in for the night.
Warm and snug in your sleeping bag, hear the winds in the pines above, the quiet babbling of the brook, the far-off coo of the morning dove. The forest creatures have gone to bed. Now it's time for you to sleep. Snuggle down in your purple tent and rest your head while I count the sheep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, D7. Now close your eyes and go to sleep, and in the morning we'll play again.
Baba put his guitar away, and Grandma and Baba snuggled into their own sleeping bags. Abigail could hear the soft sound of the wind whispering through the pines overhead. The haunting hoo, hoo, hoo of an owl echoed through the woods. She closed her eyes and listened to the quiet murmuring of the stream as she drifted off to dreamland. But after a while, a soft light replacing the darkness of the night woke Abigail. She blinked her eyes open and looked around the purple tent. Everyone was asleep. It should be nighttime, but it was already becoming light outside. Something very strange was happening. Abigail heard a rustling noise outside the tent. She wiggled out of her sleeping bag and unzipped the entrance flap. Bright sunlight made her eyes squint. She saw chipmunks scurrying across the forest floor, and a beautiful deer drinking from the stream. She felt wide awake now, and not sleepy at all. Abigail quietly pulled on her pants and stepped outside. She slipped on her blue tennis shoes and ran excitedly through the campsite. The deer perked up her ears and bounded away across the stream. Abigail followed, hopping from rock to rock until she reached the far side. She followed the deer along a path leading into the woods, singing to herself as she skipped along. She was so excited, she didn't stop to wonder how it could possibly be daytime in the middle of the night. The trail turned and followed a high, steep bank along the stream, which had quickly grown into a rushing river. Abigail was intent on following the running deer and didn't notice the tree root poking up right in the middle of the trail. As she ran, the root grabbed her foot and threw her tumbling down the embankment head over heels. She landed with a splash in the stream.
Stumble, tumble, bumble, crash, rumble, rumble, splash.
Before she had time to think, Abigail was swept away by the strong current. She knew how to swim. Her mama had taught her. She got her head above water, only to hear the roar of a waterfall just around the bend. The stream was pulling her toward it faster and faster. Abigail was a quick thinker. She remembered what her daddy had taught her to do if she was caught in a riptide: swim across the current. She swam as hard as she could toward a sandy spot on the shore. It was her only chance to avoid being swept over the waterfall. Abigail pulled herself closer to shore and felt her toes scrape the pebbly bottom. She pushed with her legs and swam hard across the current, finally standing up out of breath in shallow water. The roar of the waterfall filled the air as she collapsed onto the sandy beach.
Whew!
She gasped to herself.
That was close.
She took a few deep breaths to calm herself and slowly started to stand up. But something was wrong. Her feet began to sink into the ground, and the soft, wet sand closed around her legs, gripping her like a boa constrictor. Slowly, steadily, she was sinking. It was quicksand. Abigail tried to stay calm. She had sunk to her knees in the quicksand already. She strained to reach a shrub nearby, but it was just out of reach. She kept sinking.
Help!
Cried Abigail.
Can anybody hear me? Help! I'm sinking, I'm sinking. Can anybody hear me? I'm sinking, I'm sinking. Oh, please come pull me free. I'm sinking in quicksand. I'm in an awful scrape. I wish I was on dry land. Oh, how do I escape? Help, help, help. Can anybody hear me? Help, help, help. Oh, please come rescue me.
Abigail heard a slow, rumbling voice coming from the forest.
What a racket you're making, little girl.
She looked up but couldn't see anyone.
Who is it?
She asked.
Can you help me?
Oh, settle down now. My friends and I will call for help,
The mysterious voice continued. Abigail was confused, but she was glad that someone was there to help, even if they didn't seem to be in any rush.
Thank you.
She called out.
Please hurry.
Abigail covered her ears as the thunderous calling of many low voices echoed through the forest. She was up to her belly button now and still sinking. The calling stopped. She heard a great crashing as though a gigantic creature was barging through the forest, smashing everything in its way. Abigail looked to the edge of the forest and was astonished to find a huge, scaly beast staring back at her with glowing red eyes.
The Hodag!
She exclaimed to no one in particular. Abigail didn't have time to be afraid. The Hodag bounded down to her in a single leap. He gently took the collar of Abigail's sweatshirt in his teeth and pulled her from the grip of the quicksand, putting her down softly on solid ground. Then, to Abigail's astonishment, the Hodag began to sing to her in his raspy Hodag voice.
I'm the Hodag, the mighty Hodag, and I'm glad to meet you, friend. I will rescue you, 'cause it's what I do. I help and I defend. Though I look all mean and scary, I'm really very nice. I love to play and romp all day in my forest paradise.
Abigail was speechless. The Hodag could talk and sing. And just when she thought she couldn't be any more surprised, the chipmunks and birds in the forest began singing too.
He's the Hodag, the mighty Hodag, and will give you some advice. He may look all mean and scary, but he's really very nice.
And I'm famous, very famous. There's a festival just for me. It's a lot of fun for everyone. If you go there, you will see.
It's a lot of fun for everyone. If you go there, you will see.
I must be dreaming, thought Abigail. But she knew what dreams felt like, and this didn't seem like a dream at all.
Thank you, Mr. Hodag.
Exclaimed Abigail.
I was afraid no one would come to help me.
Oh, quite most certainly and happily. My great and honored pleasure,
replied the Hodag.
Is there really a festival for you?
Asked Abigail.
Why, most certainly indeed. Yes, there is,
replied the Hodag.
It's in Rhinelander, nearby and close to here.
He continued.
It's a lot of fun. The country music contest starts and begins this very weekend. You should come and be there. A fine statue of me is in town, too, and a park is named for me. I'm very and extremely famous around here.
The festival sure sounded like fun. Abigail wished she could go.
That's enough talk now,
said the Hodag.
Come, climb and scramble aboard, and we'll go and proceed to meet my friends.
The Hodag gestured for Abigail to climb up on his back. She wrapped her arms around a spike between the Hodag's shoulder blades and held on tightly as he bounded into the forest. The Hodag stopped in a small clearing surrounded by large, sturdy oak trees. Abigail stood up but stayed on his back, tightly gripping the spike.
Say hello to Gnarly and Knotty and Shaggy and Woody and the rest of the gang,
said the Hodag.
And Crooked and Branchy and Bushy, of course. They're the bestest, most wonderful, and nicest friends anyone could ever possibly, conceivably hope for. And you can thank and applaud and congratulate them, too, for saving your life. They're the ones who called and yelled and hollered for me to come.
Abigail looked around, but didn't see anyone. She was about to ask the Hodag where his friends were when she heard the same slow, rumbling voice she had heard when she was sinking in the quicksand.
Welcome, Abigail. I am Gnarly. We are glad to meet you.
The deep voice felt like soft thunder, permeating the forest air and enveloping Abigail. She looked up. The sound was coming from a majestic oak tree right in front of her. About halfway up the trunk was a gnarly face with kind eyes, gazing back at her. The oak tree continued.
My friends and I couldn't help but hear your frantic hollering, so of course we called for the Hodag, like this.
and Gnarly, accompanied by all the oak trees around him, began to sing.
There's trouble in the forest. We sing our woody chorus. The Hodag will come running in daytime or at night. He's super strong and cunning. We know he'll make it right. We call out our alarm. To keep our world from harm. And then, Abigail, the Hodag came,
said Gnarly.
You were making such a racket, I wanted to rescue you myself. But, of course, I'm an oak tree and move rather slowly. I knew the Hodag would be faster.
Gnarly paused with an irritated look on his face as a noisy, cawing flock of crows landed on his upper branches.
Excuse me,
he said,
while I get rid of these bothersome pests.
He began to shake from his trunk all the way up to his top branches, rustling his leaves and sending acorns raining down on Abigail and the Hodag. The crows took flight, squawking loudly as they flew away. Gnarly slowly turned his gaze back to Abigail.
You're quite an excitable one, aren't you?
He asked, not really looking for an answer.
Well, I was thinking. It was scary,
stammered Abigail.
I know, reassured the oak tree, sounding tired. You humans are always a bit skittish. It's okay.
The Hodag chimed in.
We should depart and leave soon. Imminently. Maybe now. Gnarly and his friends aren't used to such a lot of hullabaloo and excitation. We'll proceed and go along to my cave, where you can relax and rest.
Abigail hung on tightly while the Hodag bounded through the forest, racing across grassy meadows, jumping streams, and dodging trees. It was thrilling, like a carnival ride. Abigail loved carnival rides, the tilt-a-whirl, the Ferris wheel, and especially the roller coaster. This was like all three rolled into one. She giggled with delight as the wind swept through her hair and the trees and boulders rushed by. As her wild Hodag ride continued, Abigail began to sing.
I'm riding on a Hodag, up and down and zigzag. We're romping through the pine trees, faster than a summer breeze. It's lots of fun, thrilling too. I think maybe I've lost a shoe, but I don't care, I'm having so much fun.
After romping through the forest for a long time, the Hodag stopped in a grassy area near the bottom of a rocky cliff.
We, you and me, have almost reached and arrived at my cave,
said the Hodag.
It's roughly and just about, more or less, around the next bend or so.
Abigail was curious about the cave. She imagined it would be dark and dirty and not very pleasant at all. As they approached, she was surprised to see woodland wildflowers blooming on either side of the entrance, and a few mismatched pieces of rugs and carpets creating an entryway into the cave. Abigail climbed down off the Hodag and discovered that she had indeed lost a shoe. Her blue sneaker was still on her right foot, but she had only a sock on her left foot. She was glad there were pieces of rug and carpet covering the dirt. The Hodag ambled through the entrance, and Abigail followed him. Inside it was a bit dim, but clean and tidy. The dirt floor was mostly covered with an assortment of carpet fragments. A few camp chairs and a fold-up camp table were in one corner of the cave. Abigail looked around and found odd treasures tucked in rocky nooks and crevices. A geology field guide that looked like it had been left out in the rain. A Candyland game, also looking well used. Some rusty-looking pennies and nickels, and a child-sized canoe paddle. Abigail looked puzzled. The Hodag explained.
I find and discover nearly all of my treasures in abandoned, unoccupied campsites after the people have left and gone away. It's surprising and amazing to see the things and stuff they leave and cast aside.
Abigail continued to explore the cave. The interesting assortment of furniture and knickknacks reminded her of the teardown, Uncle Marlin and Aunt Earthworm's house. Abigail liked to poke around in their house to find unexpected treasures. Exploring the Hodag's cave made her feel a little bit like she was back in the teardown. Abigail found a charred map and peered closely at it in the dim light, trying to locate her campsite. There was a stream on the map, and a waterfall, and places labeled Oak Grove and the cave. It was the Hodag's forest. There were interesting sounding places like Lookout Point and Sandy Beach, and some places that sounded scary like the dark woods. Abigail was glad the Hodag hadn't taken her there. Abigail studied the map for a long time, until she was certain her campsite wasn't on it. She put it back on a rocky shelf and looked around to see what else she could find. She spied a flashlight way up high and stretched up on her tippy toes to reach it. She shone it deep into a crevice, revealing a silvery object, and reached in to pull out a strange-looking gadget that looked like two tubes hooked together by a dial.
What is this?
Abigail asked.
Oh, yes, of course, the tiny huge eyes,
said the Hodag, looking pleased.
View and look through them one way, and the world and all things shrink and become exceedingly tiny and small.
Abigail tried it and gasped. The Hodag had shrunk to the size of a kitten. She giggled. The Hodag was cute when he was tiny.
Now turn them around and reverse them,
suggested the Hodag.
Look and see the other way.
Abigail looked through the tiny huge eyes the usual way. She gave a tiny shriek and stumbled backwards, nearly falling over. The Hodag had grown to immense size. His teeth and horns were gigantic and scary. Abigail quickly put the tiny huge eyes down. She looked up at the regular-sized Hodag and giggled.
I like the tiny huge eyes,
she said.
They're fun.
She danced around the cave while the Hodag sang a song with her about the tiny huge eyes.
Then colossal, huger than a dino fossil, big ginormous. Tiny huge eyes is amazing, it's more fun than simply gazing. Things are not quite what they seem, I feel it's all a dream. Oh, my friend,
said the Hodag.
I see and observe that you like the tiny huge eyes very much and a lot. I would be honored and pleased if you would take and possess them for your very own.
Abigail was delighted. She looked through the tiny huge eyes again, the way that makes everything bigger. On the far side of the cave, Abigail saw a rocky shelf holding several shoes and a boot. She put down the tiny huge eyes and walked over to look more closely. She was pleased to find a red sneaker that fit her left foot almost perfectly.
Why, of course, certainly. You may have and wear that shoe,
offered the Hodag. Abigail danced around the cave in her blue and red shoes while the Hodag busied himself tidying up. Abigail saw that he had collected a strange assortment of food that she guessed he had scavenged from campsites. A few carrots, a jar of instant coffee, a stick of beef jerky, some cans of soda pop, an open bag of potato chips, and a small bag of marshmallows.
Please choose and select something to eat,
offered the Hodag. Abigail picked out a carrot and some marshmallows and a can of root beer and sat at the fold-up camp table. It wasn't the best dinner she'd ever had, but Abigail was so hungry she gobbled it down. When Abigail had finished her meal, the Hodag announced a special surprise. He was hosting a party in his cave for all the forest creatures. Soon the Hodag's friends began to arrive. The first to enter were a squirrel, some colorful birds, and a pair of spiny porcupines. Then a family of rabbits, too many to count, hopped in, followed by a goose. A raccoon carrying a large case struggled through the entrance. 2 deer bounded in, followed by 3 slithering snakes and a badger. The cave became very noisy with woodland chatter, most of which Abigail did not understand. Many of the animals brought food to share. The squirrel brought acorns, and the rabbit family brought carrots and lettuce. The raccoon even brought some pastries he'd scavenged from a campsite. Soon the fold-up camp table was piled high with food. Abigail was astonished when some of the animals brought out band instruments and began to tune up. The raccoon plunked away on the double bass, while the frog strummed what looked like a lute. The rabbit tooted on a trumpet, and 2 beautiful birds tweeted and chirped, warming up their voices. When the band was all tuned up, they began to play. A friendly badger led Abigail to the dance floor, where the Hodag was swaying with the music and a lively goose was dancing. He taught her a silly dance he called the badger bump. The friendly badger taught Abigail all the moves, how to skip and jump, and bump her feet, and bump her hips and elbows. Abigail loved the badger bump. She tried hard to remember the moves, so she could teach her mama and daddy when she got back to the campsite. Come on and take my hand, and I'll teach you a dance. I call it the badger bump. First we bump our elbows, and we bump our hips, and we move to the beat like this. Then we bump our shoulders, and we bump our rumps, and we bump our toes and knees. And we swing and sway, 'cause we're doing the badger bump. Well, now you've got the feeling, we can skip and jump while we're doing the badger bump. Then we bump our hands, and we bump our feet, and we twirl around like this. Then we bump our hips, and we bump our backs, and we bump our hips again. And we swing and sway, 'cause we're doing the badger bump. When the party was over and the Hodag's friends had left, Abigail began to feel tired and a little homesick. It was great fun to meet the friendly Hodag and dance the badger bump, but she was starting to miss her family. Abigail wished she knew how to get back to her campsite. The map she found wasn't any help, and she didn't suppose the Hodag knew where her campsite was. Maybe she could find the stream and try to follow it back. But then she remembered her adventure in Calafia. She hadn't known how to get home from the island either. But after she went to sleep in the cottage, she had somehow woken up back in her bed at home. Maybe she should try that. It didn't make much sense, but it was all she could think of.
I'm tired,
she said.
Is there somewhere I can sleep?
Why, of course, most certainly,
replied the Hodag.
Please rest here in this place. Maybe you can make a bed from these soft, cushy, and fluffy pillows stuffed with white pine needles.
He motioned to a low rock ledge covered with sticks and pebbles. In one corner, thrown in a lump, was an old green sleeping bag, and scattered about were what looked like homemade pillows. The rock ledge was mostly level but hard. Abigail swept the pebbles and sticks off with her hand and gathered up a half-dozen multicolored pillows to make a soft mattress for the sleeping bag. Some of the pillows were open on the end, and white pine needles were spilling out. Abigail wished her grandma was there to stitch them up with Aunt Diane's old sewing machine. Abigail took off her red and blue shoes and tucked the tiny huge eyes under her pillow. She snuggled into the sleeping bag and mumbled a sleepy
Good night.
to the Hodag. It wasn't long before she was deep in dreamland. Abigail was tired from her adventures and slept soundly. She dreamed of her campsite by the beautiful stream, and she dreamed of getting stuck in quicksand, and about Gnarly and the talking trees, and her wild ride on the Hodag. And she dreamed of dancing the badger bump with the friendly badger. Abigail didn't wake until the soft morning light, glowing purple from the tent fabric, gently teased her eyes open. Birds were chirping outside, and she could hear the quiet burbling of the stream. She was back at the campsite with Mama and Daddy. Her plan had worked, just like when she was in Calafia. Abigail lay quietly in her sleeping bag, thinking about her close call with the quicksand, and about the talking trees, and her grand adventure with the Hodag. She thought of the cave and all the funny trinkets the Hodag had collected. And then she remembered the tiny huge eyes. Could they still be under her pillow? She reached under her pillow, but the tiny huge eyes weren't there. She felt around and lifted up her pillow to look underneath. Still, nothing there,
Well,
she thought.
I'm being silly. Of course it was just a dream.
She was surprised that a dream could feel so real, but what else could it be? Abigail was wide awake now. Quietly, so she wouldn't wake anyone, she slipped out of the sleeping bag and into her pants and shirt. The camping rule was no shoes inside the tent. She carefully unzipped the entry flap and stepped outside. Her shoes were by the entry rug where she'd left them. But as she reached for them, Abigail gasped in amazement. In place of the 2 blue sneakers she'd taken off the night before, were 1 blue shoe and 1 red shoe. Abigail's eyes grew big, and a huge smile sparkled across her face. She put the shoes on and skipped across the campsite, swinging her hips like she was dancing the badger bump. She felt like the luckiest girl in the world. Now she'd met Queen Calafia and the Hodag. Abigail hummed the badger bump song as she danced. She decided to ask Mama and Daddy to take her to the Hodag festival. And she decided, next year, when they went camping, she'd take her little brother to meet the Hodag. The end. Come on and take my hand and I'll teach you a dance. I call it the badger bump. First we bump our elbows, then we bump our hips, and we move to the beat like this. Then we bump our shoulders, and we bump our rumps, and we bump our toes and knees. And we swing and sway, 'cause we're doing the badger bump. Well, now you've got the feeling, we can skip and jump while we're doing the badger